Good morning, everyone. My name is Lyle Janisek, and I am an Associate Planner in Sustainability at Skag. I want to thank you for joining us for today's Toolbox Tuesday, Arcgis StoryMapping, transforming data into interactive stories. For those that don't know, Toolbox Tuesdays are professional, free trainings to planning professionals and students. Toolbox training provides a range of practical skills and knowledge for local planners, including training in the use of computer-based tools and education in practical approaches to timely planning issues. We are very excited for today's training on Esri ArcGIS StoryMaps. I also wanted to give a little update on another Skag-related item, the 2021 Skag Sustainability Awards. We're now accepting nominations for 2021 Skag Sustainability Awards. We have 5 categories up on the screen. And just a heads up, the deadline to submit nominations is going to be this Friday, February 26th, and that will wrap up at 11:59 p.m. Feel free to visit our website. You can search Skag Sustainability Awards and it should take you right there. We have just a few, I think 3 questions that we ask about your nomination, and it's pretty quick and easy. So take a look at that and nominate a great project if you'd like. For some housekeeping, the meeting length will be 2 hours today. It will run until noon. This meeting will be recorded. All participant lines will be muted. At the end, there will be a Q&A session. However, if you do have any questions along the way, feel free to insert them into the chat box. We can have our presenters respond to those if necessary, or if you'd like, you can add your email address and we can get you a response after the presentation. We will log all questions and then voice a selection at the end of the presentation. And then within the week, a recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint slides will be available on our Skag website. And we'll also send a link to everyone who has registered after the event. Today's agenda includes presentations from Esri, staff from the City of Los Angeles and City of Riverside, a brief overview of the 2021 Student Showcase competition. We'll have presentations from our top 2 winners from the 2020 Student Showcase, and we'll end with a tutorial led by Esri staff. There will also be a Q&A session at the end, time permitting. We will have staff recording questions throughout the entire presentation. With that, I'd like to start off with our first presenter. We have Bern Suzkalski, pardon me, Bern, from Esri. Bern is a tech evangelist, senior principal product manager, and product strategist at Esri, focusing on ways to broaden access to geographic information and helping users succeed with the ArcGIS platform. He is currently focused on making GIS more widely available and shareable via the web. His greatest satisfaction comes from helping users understand and become successful with new technologies, working with development teams to drive software evolution, and lifting new products to success. Bern, I'm going to hand it on over to you.
Okay, thanks, Lyle. It looks like I'm sharing. Can you?
Yep.
Yep.
I can see it.
Okay, great, awesome. Hey, good morning, everybody, and many thanks to Lyle and also to Skag for providing me an opportunity to join you today. I'm really excited to be here as part of this presentation, and especially excited to talk a little bit about StoryMaps. So as part of the introductory part here, let's talk a little bit about what is a story map and what are some of its basic elements. And in order to do this presentation, I'm actually using a story map. So this will give you an idea of what one might look like and how one might work. And we'll take a deeper dive as we move into the tutorial later during this workshop. So ArcGIS story maps, they combine interactive maps, sometimes not interactive maps, but they combine that with multimedia content. This can be videos, it can be photos, can be animations. And that, of course, is accompanied by the story, the narrative text that completes the story map. And it allows us to tell stories about the world that we live in, or what we want to focus on in terms of a topic to share with others. So these are easy to author and they're very easy to share. And you'll see a compelling story map really is an effective way to reach a broader audience and inform and educate and also entertain. Now, story maps are designed responsibly, and what that means is that you can author once, and then you can use them on a variety of different screen sizes. So whether you can author them in a browser, you can open them on your tablet or on your phone, and things just move around automatically to fit the available landscapes. That's a very nice feature. Building a story map is actually pretty simple. You use a series of blocks, building blocks, if you will, and you add them to your blank canvas and you configure those with either text or images or maps. There's special kinds of blocks that are more immersive, so they'll fill the entire screen. Others are designed for you to choose whether you want them to fill the screen or just a portion of it. But it's a simple matter of selecting a block and then configuring that block once you add it to your story. Now, the nice thing about story maps is they are entirely hosted by Esri in the cloud. So the framework for authoring, as well as all of the story maps that you authored, are stored in the Esri cloud. Now, years ago, when I first began with the StoryMaps team, we began with what we now call the classic apps. And these have progressed quite a long ways since we first envisioned these in 2012. One of the big differences was that these classic apps were all different. So one of the challenges that we found for storytellers was they had to make a decision about which framework was appropriate for telling their story within. And a lot of times you'd start with one framework and then decide, that's not really quite the way I want this to work. I want to use another one. And you had to start all over again. It wasn't easy to transition from one type of story experience to another. But that's all changed now by using blocks. So many of these blocks actually replicate the functionality that used to be in these independent story builders from the past. So now we have the next generation story maps, which began evolving in 2019. They're still evolving today. The classic ones are still there. You can still use them if you want. You can still author and edit them, but sometime next year, they will start to become uneditable for new maps and you could maintain existing maps. But we're encouraging everybody to move forward with these new next generation story maps. Now, since they were introduced, story maps have become wildly popular just because they're so cool and so engaging and so much fun to create. So as of recently, there are over 1.5 million story maps that are hosted on Esri's cloud. So that's quite a lot of them. And many organizations are using story maps, many federal government organizations, local government organizations, basically GIS users from all over are using these, but they're especially exploding in the classroom. So these seem to be a very effective way for students to accomplish things, to tell stories, for educators to communicate with their students. So these are really important for public access and presenting interesting information. So they're just exploding in the classroom. Now, the main StoryMaps website is at esri.com/storymaps, and let's take a quick look over there. So at that destination, you'll be able to read about story maps, get a little bit more of a background about what story maps are and how you can begin to use them. We recently had a story maps competition and you can view the gallery there and take a look at those. You can also click the Explore Stories tab, which is where I go regularly to see some of the latest highlighted stories. So the top section is what we're reading. Let's just take a look at one of these. This one just appeared this morning. I really like this one. One thing that I'm not going to be able to do for you now, but you'll be able to turn on later if you visit this story, is that this actually includes audio. So you'll hear the birds in the background. They've been captured and the audio is included as part of the story. And you can see this is using an immersive block with some really nice pictures that make the story very captivating and very engaging. So this is a really good example of a very interesting story. It actually doesn't have any maps, but in this case, it doesn't need to. Now, let's take a look at another little section as we scroll down. we'll see what, the kind of different categories of editors' picks and so forth. I found another one that I really liked the other day, and this is in the Applied GIS group. And here's one that talks about the equity index in Los Angeles, something I think we're all kind of interested in these days. And you can see that this one kind of starts off with a nice little video, which entices us into the story. It has tabs along the top for navigation. This afternoon, I'll show you how you can build these. And it has some very nice maps. And these maps include a legend, so I can expand the legend and see what's going on. It includes some nicely crafted pop-ups, which provide information about the features on the map, including pie charts. It includes some navigation tools, which allow me to zoom in and zoom out. And I can even open this up in kind of a larger view so that I can explore it in more detail. Anyway, I'll leave the exploration of the story maps up to you. And with that introduction, I'm going to go ahead and turn things back to Lyle.
Great, thank you, Bern. Up next, we have Brittany. I learned how to say her name yesterday, and I feel like I'm going to butcher it. It's Arsenault, and I feel free to correct me. She resides from the city of Los Angeles. She is a city planner there. Currently, she's working to update the downtown Los Angeles Central City and Central City North community plans as part of the department's new community plan program. The update will build on downtown's transit-rich areas, and will apply new zoning tools developed as part of the city's Recode LA project. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Brittany.
Thanks, Lyle. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Excited to be here to talk a little bit about the Downtown Community Plan. So I am the project manager on the Community Plan update. This project launched in 2014, and we are doing a comprehensive update to all of the zoning and land use regulations in downtown. So this is just one of 35 community plan areas in the city of LA. A community plan area is comparable in size to a small US city. So it's about a 6 square mile area, similar to the size of the city of Beverly Hills. And we are a team of 4 to 5 planners who are crafting new zoning regulations for every parcel in the plan area. So we're really excited to be able to use the StoryMap tool because it was quick and efficient and really provided a framework and graphic style that could reach a broad network of stakeholders. There are about 80,000 people in downtown with varying backgrounds and understanding of planning concepts. What's really interesting in downtown is we have a lot of architects and business development groups and people who are really savvy with planning tools, interactive maps, zoning concepts. But then we also have a lot of employees and newer residents that, you know, really just come downtown for their daily services and needs and are not always engaged in planning ideas. So one really great thing about using the story map, and particularly the cascade feature, was we were able to share information in kind of focusing on these different groups simultaneously. So allowing a platform that can scale up and scale down depending on the user's time and interest. So a community plan is broken down into 3 main components. So there's a community plan text document, which includes policies and goals and really memorializes the vision over how downtown should evolve over the next 20 years. The next piece is the general plan land use map, and this is a legal document that comprises the land use element of the city of Los Angeles, the general plan. So this is a state required map that kind of sets general range of uses in the plan area. And then lastly, we have the zoning code. So the specific regulations that speak to things like how tall a building can be, are residential units allowed within a building. So these are kind of the main materials that we have on our website, but it really is kind of a treasure hunt if you're not super familiar with planning and city documents to fully kind of see the picture or understand the story of what this plan is trying to achieve. So I'm just going to take a sample from our story map. So what we did is we organized it similar to an executive summary. So we created this story map to be kind of an interactive executive summary where we isolated themes of the plan, such as housing, employment growth, things like community character and neighborhood preservation. And then in each section, we kind of established a framework for different user experiences. So I'm going to show you housing as an example. So first, we start off with this intent statement about what the plan is trying to achieve in regards to housing, making sure that the plan is facilitating housing that meets the income levels of all downtown residents and really expands the residential base of downtown. So this is something that for someone who is not familiar or has a background in planning, that they would be able to read this and kind of get a quick understanding of what we're doing. The next slide, this is, we created an InDesign and then just uploaded an image. But these icons are really helpful to understand the strategies. So this is how we distill down what the zoning is doing. So rather than looking at codes of pages of the zoning code, this kind of summarizes the intent behind the regulations. So this is for someone who is like, okay, maybe let me try and understand how exactly they're trying to meet that intent that I read in the last slide. And then we have things like this that are more visually oriented. And these are really quick snapshots. These were really helpful for our media inquiries, like people who are looking for just quick stats or quick visual aids on the plan that don't necessarily want to zoom in and out and kind of understand the details. They want to see the big picture, and they want something that's really tangible. So we were able to kind of tell the story in more of a spatial manner. And then lastly, for all of our planning experts and people who really want to dive into the detail, we also included this interactive map that shows exactly where the different housing strategies are applied in the plan area. And then we included pop-ups where someone could search by address and zoom in and say, what's going on in my property? What types of housing can I develop? And then they would be able to click on it and see a customized pop-out window that explains what the housing regulations would be on that property. So we took a similar approach for the other themes of the plan, as I mentioned, like employment and community character. And we were able to bring laptops to our outreach events and have this story map available for people to scroll through. It was really great as people were waiting to kind of meet with planners, or a good replacement for some of our outreach boards. Usually we'll print like poster boards, and all of this information will have to fill up an entire room on a number of 36 by 48 poster boards. So it was also really nice to be more tactical, kind of playing around with different displays and different mediums to kind of share the plan concepts. So I think with that, I'll wrap it up. And if you have any questions about the downtown plan or any of the kind of other tools we use to create our graphics, or how we set up our database to facilitate our pop-up windows, I'm happy to talk. Feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact. And also just want to acknowledge some of the other team members that worked on the plan.
Great, thank you, Brittany Ursino. I appreciate you sharing more information about the community downtown plan. Our next presenter is Jonathan Marks. Jonathan is an economic development project coordinator at the City of Riverside. He has worked at the city of Riverside for over 7 years and has assisted businesses of all sizes. Jonathan has recently helped fill a 1 million square foot warehouse that was sold to Nordstrom for $124 million. It's among the Inland Empire's most expensive transactions ever. He strives to bring innovative approaches to attract businesses to the city of Riverside. Jonathan, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Lyle. Let me share my screen. And there we go. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Oh, let's go. There we go. Should be good.
Yep, we're good.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm taking a different type of approach. We created our story map to sell our city. So as an economic developer, we go out and we usually print up a bunch of flyers and try to get businesses to come to the city. So when I came to the city, they were doing some very old school print ads and very time intensive, very expensive ads. So I was thinking to myself, how can we do it better? So we ended up with story maps. So let me start by showing you the first little bit. Let me see if I can move this out of the way. There we go. So originally, this was our original idea for maps that we used to take to conferences with us to help sell the city. Now, you can't really see it, but this was a printed map. And then on top of it was a clear cover that you laid over the top of it, and it would tell you the prices in each, or the housing income, and then the number of households in that area, as you can see right here and whatnot. So they used to print these every single year and have to update this every single year. I believe the estimate when we were going to reprint them was over $1,000 for, I forget how many. It was quite expensive. So the time and the money was just too much. So we were trying to look for a simpler way to tell the same story and get the same amount of information out to the businesses or to developers or to brokers or whoever. So that's why we ended up creating the story map. So every year we go to ICSC up in Vegas and we try to sell the city to as many people as we can, businesses or whoever that might be. So one of the things we wanted to do was cut down on paper products, just because we wanted to try to be more sustainable, to cut down on costs, and to hopefully create a product that was easy for us to change ourselves without having to go to marketing and create a very time intensive map. So we ended up creating the story map, and the story map, we still had to go to marketing, but it helped us save a lot of costs because we didn't have to go take it to print. So marketing worked on with everything in this left-hand bar. So these are all images that we were able to put into the story map itself. Most of this data was used with another Esri product, Business Analysts Online, so that it was very helpful to integrate the two. But we were able to put all this text in and focus on each area specifically. And one of the nice features was that when you scroll to one of the shopping centers, such as the Galleria, it could zoom into the location and show them exactly where it is corresponding to the freeway, some of the main streets like Magnolia Avenue, and give them a kind of an idea of what it looks like. And then we created this graphic over here with Business Analysts Online. So one of the great benefits of this is we were able to provide more data and more information while still keeping it really cost efficient and being able to show them a lot more. One of the things that was kind of weird to think about how do you distribute this at a conference was, so we went from going to buying paper products to buying USB drives. And we would take this map as a link and load it up into the USB drive. And then we would also contact each of the brokers and have them put in packets of properties for sale in each one of these places, our contact cards on top of the USB drive, and other different brochures or whatever we wanted to share with these people. So instead of walking around with multiple packets of paper and business cards and everything, we were literally carrying around just a bunch of USB drives. And when we met with people, we would hand them a USB drive that was branded with the city of Riverside. And they would be able to get all this contact information, all these different reports, all these different, site selection packets and incentives and everything in one packet. And I don't know if our mind would have shifted towards that way if it wasn't for the story map. When we took the map digital, because this was the main attraction piece when we went to a lot of these conferences back in the day, this is the attraction piece. So when this went digital, we had to think of different ways to go digital with other things. And that allowed us to think outside the box and start only taking USB drives with us. And it actually saved us a lot of money, time, and I think it made us look a little bit more innovative instead of walking around with big old packets. One of the things that we also liked about the story map was its ability to be used on mobile devices. So this is a simulation of an iPhone X. You're able to pull up the story map, see the same information. So even when we're at the conference, sometimes you're standing there talking to someone on the showroom floor, and I could send them the link and they would be able to pull this right up on their phone and start looking through it. Another thing that we liked about the story map was that we could have iPads at each of our booths with the story map up. So when people walk by, they could scroll through it and take a look at what we had available or anything like that. So the main focus of the story map for us was to be innovative, be more sustainable, cut down on costs, and present the city in a better light, in a more modern approach. Other than that, it was super easy to do. I'm not a GIS person, so I don't really get into the map that much. But previously, when we had this map, we had the layers over it where it would usually show the neighborhoods and the incomes. We didn't get it updated in time for this presentation, and this map is a little bit old. Unfortunately, COVID shut down the 2020 conference, so we didn't get to update it. But yeah, it was really nice. We get to design it with all our colors and all our marketing features. We were able to put our logo up here. You're able to brand it the way that you want it to. So I highly recommend it to a lot of our economic developer people out there to try to cut down on costs and be a little bit more innovative. And yeah, so if you have any questions, let me know. I'll put my email address in the comments, and that's about it for me.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. I'm gonna share my screen. Up next, we have Bonnie Kim. Bonnie Kim is also a city planner at the City of Los Angeles. She is in the Code Studies Division of the Los Angeles Department of City Planning. In her current role, she oversees a team responsible for preparing zoning code amendments. Over the years, Bonnie has advanced long-term initiatives that have increased the transparency and accessibility of planning. In particular, she manages the effort to improve and reorganize the zoning code's processes and procedures so that the rules for reviewing projects and opportunities for public participation are clear to all stakeholders. Bonnie received a bachelor's degree in urban studies from Brown University. She previously assisted with the adoption of the general plan health element and also established the city's urban agricultural incentive zone program. I'm going to hand it off to Bonnie now.
Thank you for the introduction, Lyle, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully this works smoothly. So I'm the project manager for the Process and Procedures Ordinance, which is a larger effort to simplify and make the zoning code more accessible. And it's actually related to the downtown community plan that Brittany spoke about earlier, but this particular ordinance only deals with the administrative provisions of the zoning code. So there's actually no mapping involved with this ordinance. And so we sort of use this GIS story map template more as a web page and a web resource, more so than a map. But I'll just go through and show you sort of how we managed to use it to help out in our outreach, because this ordinance is actually, I think it's in year 4 now, and a previous draft was released in 2018, and at that time it actually received a lot of opposition because we realized that our messaging was very unclear to folks who are not already familiar with our convoluted zoning system. So we use the StoryMap template to try to really focus on creating an accessible resource. So you'll see that we really focus on using plain English type language, very simple. What is the ordinance? What does it do? Why is it important? Kept it short. The tabs, navigation tabs, don't use too much jargon. And we do link to the large ordinance, and the ordinance as a whole is about 700 pages. So, for those who are real technical experts, they can look at that 700-page document for all the nitty-gritty details. But for most people, they really just wanted the key highlights. And we were able to, the biggest tool that we were able to take advantage of with this StoryMap template was the multimedia aspect, particularly the uploading of videos. So I'll go ahead and share an animation that our department, that my team was able to create in-house that sort of illustrates this key concept of standardization and consolidation, which is sort of the sausage making behind the ordinance as a whole. So we'll just hope that the audio works smoothly. When we say processes were standardized and consolidated, what does that mean? The logic behind standardization and consolidation is based on understanding the difference between a process and procedures. The process can be described as the overall path for obtaining project approval, while the procedures are the individual steps in the path. With this understanding, we are able to compare processes with similar procedures and identify which ones can be consolidated. Our efforts to simplify the rules for project reviews start with a comparison between processes that have key similarities and procedures. In this example, we can see 3 separate processes which have some differences but share the same initial decision maker and appellate decision maker. What's different between the 3 processes in this example is the procedures for notification of public hearing, the time to act, and the appeal period, all of which have to do with time periods. It's no wonder that there is uncertainty about the rules when each process has its own slightly different time periods, for example. So how can we improve this situation and make the rules more clear? We've consolidated approximately 120 processes down to about 60 while maintaining the full variety of project reviews. Notice what is not being changed through standardization or consolidation, the regulation that tells you when a project has to go down a certain approval path, which we call the entitlement threshold. This ordinance instead focuses on what rules apply once a project is on a path. So hopefully, that sort of covered in a nutshell, in this 2-minute video, what the crux, the main point of the ordinance is. And, given that this story map we used, it debuted in November of last year. So it was, after several months of the pandemic, and we've shifted to this digital outreach model. Being able to call up, this embedded video and use it in our conversations and meetings with the public, when we brief, the elected officials like the city council members, this has been a really great tool for us to sort of explain the larger concept without having to, try to explain a 700-page document with just words. So, the rest of the story map is quite simple. Again, this section just talks about all of the changes that are being proposed. And it is still a lot of text, but it's just a little more dynamic than the standard frequently asked questions sheet that we would otherwise prepare. We have, just this little timeline. It's a little more graphic than just, simple dates. And then, of course, we have next steps with contact information. And again, we're using this sort of plain English language to try to make it as layperson friendly as possible. So that's really it. We've, in our experience with using this story map template, I think we've found that it just is really great at being able to communicate sort of more technical, complicated projects in a user-friendly format.
Great, thank you, Bonnie. We appreciate you sharing more about the processes and procedure presentation. Before we move on to our next stage, I'm going to give a little background information regarding the Skag Student Showcase. The first portion of this webinar featured city story maps, and then the next two presentations will be done by our two winners from last year's Student Showcase. For those that do not know, the Student Showcase is a story map competition. This is, I believe, our 6th year of doing it. And these are some of the rules that we have. What we are looking for are students within the Skag region that are attending a university or college, or have graduated from a university or college within the Skag region over the last 12 months. We're looking to see some of their research and studies that they have completed during work or during school. And what we're hoping to do is see how they can challenge themselves in using open data, presumably from Skag. These are some of the rules we have. As I've said, you must be a college student within the Skag region or graduated from college within the last 12 months. We accept individual submissions only. Individuals may submit more than one abstract for consideration. So if you have a few different ideas, you can submit an abstract. Those will be due on March 8th at 10 a.m. The abstracts are very, very simple, 500 word max, just giving us a background of what you intend to showcase. We'd ask for a primary contact person, the name and contact information of your faculty advisor or your formal faculty advisor, and then once again, the name of the college or university you're attending. I will drop the link to this information into the chat in just a second. What we also are requiring and requesting for this is that the story map that the students put together include data from our Skag open data set. The project must use this. Administrative boundaries are recommended, but that's not the only data source you're supposed to use. We have land use data, we have transportation data, active transportation data, quite a few resources available. We also request that any documents, images, or videos that you include or embed into your story map, you do so with the permission of the respective author and properly source these attributes. Entries will be judged on their innovative use of Skag data and Esri StoryMaps, relevancy to Southern California's regional economy, transportation system, or housing supply, and potential value to local stakeholders. Once again, the abstracts will be due March 8th at 10 a.m. Within 24 hours, you'll be notified of whether to proceed or not. And with that, the final projects will then be due April 7th at 10 a.m. With that, I'm going to move on to our first winner of last year's student showcase, which is Daniel Leibowitz. Daniel is a GIS specialist for the Los Angeles County Development Authority. He graduated from UCLA in 2020 with a degree in geography and environmental studies and a minor in geographic information systems. He is passionate about the environment and sustainability and the ways in which GIS can drive improvements to both the planet and the lives of the people living on it. Daniel was born in South Africa and grew up in San Diego, California before moving to Los Angeles for college. In his free time, you can find Daniel taking photos, reading, watching a movie, or listening to classic rock. Daniel was our first prize winner in our innovation category. I'm going to hand it off to him to describe his story map that he submitted last year.
Thanks so much, Lyle. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So thanks again, Lyle, for the introduction and for having me on. The purpose of my story map really centers around public transportation and access to that public and mass transit. And I decided to focus on that partially because of the data that I found on the open data portal, and because that's such a central part to Skag's mission. As you can see, I pulled in a quote from the Skag official website over here, and that's also something I'm really passionate about, is sustainability, the environment, and particularly sustainable urban development. So a couple definitions just to set the context for my story map. It's important to know about these for my analysis. First one is catchment area, which really describes the geographic area served by an institution. I also take it to mean the population served, and in this case, the institution is public transit in the Skag region. The main data set that my analysis focused on was these transit priority areas estimated for 2045. I'm going to call them TPAs from now on. And those are described as areas contained within a half-mile radius from major transit stops. The rest of the definition is important as well, but I'm not going to go through that right now. And then the last important part is what first or last mile mobility means. And it's really that first or last part of a commute that connects somebody's point of origin or destination, so their home or their work, to the public transportation that they're using. To start my story map off, I wanted to set some geographic context. So I have the 6 counties here that the Skag region encapsulates. And over here in orange are the TPAs. Since they're pretty small, I provided another larger scale map over here that also included the ability to open up the legend and zoom in and out and interact, just so people can get a sense of where the TPAs are placed in the Skag region. And then the other main data set from the Skag Open Data Portal that I used was this bicycle infrastructure active transportation data set. And I built off of some findings from a paper published in 2014 by Flam and Rivasplata that talks about cycle transit users, or CTUs, and how changing policy to increase the integration between bicycle infrastructure, or really any active transportation infrastructure, and public transportation improves the access to that transportation. Over here, you can see that this data set covers a pretty considerable amount of the Skag region. All of these blue lines are some kind of bicycle infrastructure, be it a bike route, a bike lane, bike path. And the main finding that I based my analysis off of was that the catchment areas are indeed significantly larger than pedestrian catchment areas. So you have much more access to public transportation with a larger catchment area and a larger population served when you bring good bicycle infrastructure integration into the equation. Of course, that also has indirect benefits, but nonetheless very important benefits, such as reducing traffic congestion because less cars on the road since people are using mass transit, and that brings improvements in air quality and overall just really good environmental and public health impacts. To start off my analysis, I took that large bicycle data set and I calculated something called a kernel density heat map, which basically takes those line features and calculates their density into a raster or an image where each pixel's value is a density. In this case, it was number of bike routes per square mile. I then took census tracts, which is the shapes that we have over here. You can see it better when I zoom in. They are the 2010 US Census Bureau census tracts in the area. And for each census tract, I sampled the pixels inside that census tract to get the average bike route density. And that way you can kind of get a good picture throughout the Skag region of where the concentration of bike routes is. I also then delved a little deeper into actually analyzing the subject of the main finding in the Flam and Rivasplata paper. And I started doing this based off of their analysis that in Philadelphia, CTUs, which again, that's the cycle transit user, traveled on average 2.8 miles in Philadelphia and 5.4 miles in San Francisco as part of their daily trips. Now, I chose Philadelphia as the value for my analysis because, as they explain in the paper, it's actually a lot more similar to a lot of Southern California cities, namely LA, than San Francisco is. Assuming that that 2.8 miles was a round trip value for the day, I divided it in half to get a 1.4 mile value that I used to create buffers around the TPA. So the TPAs here are in the more solid orange, and the more transparent orange surrounding that is this 1.4 mile buffer, increasing that catchment area. I then calculated the percent overlap with the original TPAs and the buffered TPAs for each of those census tracts. And I used that percentage value to multiply by the population to get an estimate of the population served in a given catchment area. Of course, you know, that is an estimate because it's assuming even population distribution across a census tract, but it was the best way I found to get a quantitative estimate of this. And what I came up with was that the original smaller dark solid TPA area serves an estimated 3,980,373 people in the Skag region. Whereas when you add the 1.4 mile buffer, assuming bicycle infrastructure integration, that number jumps way up to 10,660,293 people. So that's about a 167.82% increase, which is really significant. Unfortunately, when I made the story map, I was having issues displaying this layer in the web map. And so this is actually a screenshot rather than an interactive map. But the analysis impact remains the same. The issue, though, is that, as we saw earlier on, the distribution of bike features throughout here is not exactly the same as the assumed increase in TPA catchment area. There's an uneven distribution because the bike route features are not built up to the same level everywhere. And so to fully realize that estimated increase in population served, I found, there need to be improvements in the bicycle infrastructure where it's currently lacking. And to drive the targeting of those improvements, in my conclusions section, I decided to go through and symbolize the bike route density again for those census tracts, but this time using a difference from the mean in standard deviation. And so the areas in the dark red actually symbolize places that are greater than 1 standard deviation away from the mean, which means those are good places to target. Those are the places with the lowest relative bicycle feature density. And then that's obviously not the only thing that needs considering, because different communities rely more heavily on mass transit and thus would benefit more from targeted bicycle infrastructure improvements. And a lot of that can be analyzed using census demographic information. In this case, since a census is only every 10 years, there's the American Community Survey to come in and provide some more updated data. For this story map, I used the 2016 American Community Survey. And what I did is pull in median household income from 2016. The darkest purple is the highest median income level, and the dark orange is the lowest. And so by looking at these areas, you can get a better sense of what the economic need or social need might be for increased infrastructure in some of those lower bicycle density areas. And using all that information together, I think that with proper planning, analysis, and implementation, the significant increase in public transit catchment area as a result of improved bicycle last mobility access shown here could transition from a possibility to a reality in the Skag region. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to my presentation.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. We appreciate, all the work and time and effort that went into that presentation. Great job. For our next presentation, we have the first place prize winner in the planning category, Miss Demi Espinoza. Demi is our second student presenter. She placed first in our 2020 student showcase in the planning category. She currently works as the California Desert Program Manager at National Parks Conservation Association. She has a passion for working with community-based organizations, local government, and nonprofits to uplift underserved and under-resourced communities through policy analysis, community engagement, and organizing. She is committed to conservation biology, environmental justice, climate justice, and racial justice. Without further ado, I'll hand it off to Demi to present her prize-winning story map.
Thank you so much, Lyle, and it's so wonderful to be here with Skag and Esri. So I'm going to go ahead and share my story map. Once again, my name is Demi Espinoza, and I'm a graduate student with the Urban Sustainability Department at Antioch University. And I created this story map for my beginning GIS class while I was working for Safe Routes Partnership. And I was really drawn to the platform of the story map template because it gives you the ability to combine photos, videos, and maps to tell an overarching narrative of an issue. And I really thought it was important to elevate the voices of people driving a campaign and offer a larger contextual narrative that you might miss if you're looking at a map, if you're just looking at a map. And so my audience for this story map was, number one, more community members to get involved into this campaign. And second, I wanted to use this story map to offer, to support a funding app. Oops, it looks like it was muted. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay, great. Great. So I, created this story map for two purposes. One, to bring more community members in, to get involved in the campaign, and two, to support a funding application for the community. So this is kind of a map describing where the location is. And so I worked with Musqueam community members, which is a rural environmental justice area in the largest county in the US, which is the San Bernardino County. And I really wanted to offer the introduction of a table of contents to give the reader a sense of where the journey of the story map is going to lead you as you're reading along. Number one, I wanted to talk about environmental justice. Number two, park access and transit service. And number three, safe routes to school. So this map, I was able to collect data from CalEnviroscreen, which looks at pollution burden and population characteristics. So I really thought this was important to show that Musqueam is among the highest 95 to 100 percentile of pollution burden. And this is some of the lived experiences that community members are facing with air quality, diesel pollution, and particulate matter. And the South Coast Air Quality Management District is doing some really great work there, doing a community air monitoring plan, a community emissions reduction plan. So I wanted to kind of highlight and showcase some of the agency work that is happening there. This map describes some of the elementary schools and their proximity to warehouse facilities. And I symbolized each of the warehouse facilities using some of the Skag data that I was able to collect, so you can get an idea of what are some of the industrial hazards that are near the elementary schools that could pose some danger and some threat to safe routes to school programming. And here's a list of mobile sources of pollution and stationary sources of pollution. And access to parks is a huge community priority issue. So I wanted to articulate that in the story map as well. Transit, so you can see here, the purple lines are symbolized to articulate Omnitrans bus stops and routes that are near parks, which definitely shows some insufficiencies and calls for improvements that could be added. And then here's kind of a bird's eye view of all the safe routes to school programming and schools. And for folks who might not be familiar with Safe Routes to School programming, it's basically a walkability program to ensure students have safe passage to walk to and from school or to bike. And mobility challenges are often an issue in rural communities. And so having Safe Routes to School programming is really essential to student health and community health. And here's where I shift into more of the community narrative. I wanted to show how a lot of the parents and students were organizing to develop a campaign to bring resources on things that they were concerned about. They were concerned about speed reduction measures, lack of sidewalks, lack of crosswalks, and wanted more bus shelters to protect students to and walking from school. This is a photo when we did some walk audits, so we wanted to do some assessments with Assembly Member Eloise Gomez-Reyes and some community members. And then here, I wanted to look at two schools in particular, Vermont Elementary School and Musqueam Elementary School, and wanted to look at what are some of the mobility challenges and also depict some serious incidents of pedestrian and cyclist injuries and collisions. So you can see the red points here articulate incidents of pedestrian and cyclist collisions, so very near schools, which is what parents were concerned with. And here's a little bit closer view of Vermont and Musqueam. And San Bernardino County Public Works actually did a survey to parents in Spanish and English. And what they found was that parents did want their students to walk and bike to school. They thought it was a healthy activity, but the current conditions, you know, they had a lot of concerns about what infrastructure was around and was available, and they didn't feel like their students were safe to do that activity. So we continue to do walk audits with the community. And here's some photos of, you know, the lack of sidewalks. And these are some of the corridors where it's been noted that vehicular traffic is very fast along these streets. And then with the help of Skag's Go Human program, we were able to do a small temporary demonstration to work with community members to reimagine what their streets could look like and how their streets can serve them. So we did some artistic crosswalks. We also did some bus shelters, and this was all student-led. And as you can see, some students did some artistic crosswalks here. And this was back in 2018. We also use that as an opportunity to survey students in Spanish and English to ask them about their support for sidewalks and bus shelters. And so it was a really great community event. We had one of the student leaders be able to provide testimony and do a speech. And so I'm happy to share this story map at a later time, and you can watch her video and you can hear her powerful testimony. UC Berkeley and California Walks did a really important study that I wanted to add to this story map. They also asked community members where there have been incidents of almost getting in a collision or almost getting hit, which we call near misses. And so those are often underreported. And so I wanted to put this in the map to show where there could be points for intersection improvements and infrastructure improvements. With the help of the Coalition for Clean Air, we also did more community engagement events. We did a walk to school day and a clean air day event. And that's just like a great picture of the parents who organized that event. Here's all the Musqueam partners that we worked with on this campaign and wanted to give them, you know, a shout out and immense gratitude for working on this project. And here's community leaders who have been outspoken at conferences, and Rosa, who's on the right-hand side, is a parent leader, and she was honored by Assembly Member Reyes, and she continues to be a strong advocate for safe routes to school. And like I mentioned in the beginning, one of the audiences was potential funders. So I wanted to make this story map to show the timeline of this campaign and use it as a part of a grant application that San Bernardino County Public Works submitted. And I used a platform that I highly recommend if you're out and trying to get more feedback from community members. It's a template called Survey 123. So if in this context, in the story map, I asked if you're a Musqueam resident, if you wanted to share some of your thoughts, what concerns you have, so we can continue to collect data from the community. And before I conclude, I just wanted to go back to this slide about the grant application. So this story map was just one piece of a larger grant application, and San Bernardino County Public Works submitted it as a part of the Active Transportation Program, the ATP Cycle 5. And we just got word a couple weeks ago that it was funded. It was actually ranked and tied for the top third highest scoring grant. And so was able to get some resources, and it won a $1.7 million grant for infrastructure. So I'm a big fan of happy endings, and this definitely was a happy ending for Musqueam Safe Routes to School. But this is just the beginning. Community leaders are still organizing to bring more resources and infrastructure to their community. But this is just one way that story maps can be implemented in the advocacy that you can do, working with community members and agencies. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Demi. We appreciate all of the hard work that our students have done in the past, and are very much looking forward to seeing the projects that come in over the next few weeks regarding the 2021 Student Showcase. Our next phase of the webinar is going to be a very quick break. We are going to pause until 11:08. After that, what we're going to do is have a tutorial led by Bern from Esri. For those who would like to participate in the and go alongside with Bern as he navigates through, during this time you can register for a free Esri account. I will put that in the chat. And then also I will put in a link to the data that Skag has provided for, or that Bern has provided for us for this presentation. So let's take a quick pause, get some coffee, use the restroom if you need to, and sign up for a free Esri account if you don't already have one. And we'll get started here shortly. Thank you. All right. I hope that was plenty of time to get things set up. I've been told by Bern that the link of the group for the data will be accessible beyond just this presentation. So if you want to follow along and then complete the tutorial later, you are welcome to do so. So for now, I'm going to hand it back over to Bern to take us through a story mapping tutorial. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Lyle. Let me just quickly get set up here. Start my video, and let's go ahead and share the screen. So this is going to be informal, so feel free to jump in with a question if you like. And you can also enter things in the chat window, and then we can go ahead and pick those up. I just want to verify with Lyle, if you could, and let me know that you can see my screen and a shared PowerPoint.
Yep, I can see it.
All righty. So let's go ahead and dive right in. And by the way, all of these resources that I am showing you are in a group. And I believe Lila shared that with everybody, and the old group from last year is even still up there. So this will be around, and you can reference these. I've put in some story mapping tutorials. I've added a couple of other resources, which I think you might find helpful in your storytelling endeavors. But let's just go ahead and go through here. So your mission is, if you're one of the students participating in the competition, your mission is going to be to author a sustainability planning story using Arcgis StoryMaps, and of course focusing on the data that's been made available through Skag. And we'll show you how to access that and some additional things you might want to consider doing to that data as you begin to use those in your stories. For the rest of you, your mission is going to be to create a great story using Arcgis StoryMaps. So you're sort of unbound by the competition rules and can just go and explore topics of your own interest and just have a really good time and enjoy building some really cool story maps. So that's Skag group. And by the way, this PowerPoint presentation in PDF form is in that group. And anytime you see the little finger here, that's a little link. And just go ahead and click on that, and that'll open up the group and show all the different content that's in there. And you can just open up any of this directly from that group. So in that PDF file of this presentation, just look for the little finger button. So as we covered a little bit earlier, Arcgis story maps help you tell stories with maps that inform and inspire and also entertain. And you use a builder to add text and media and also maps. And the place that you start doing that is storymaps.arcgis.com. Now, I noticed during some of the presentations, those were really excellent story maps. Some of those were the classic story maps. So those are the ones that had a separate builder for each style of story. I'm encouraging everybody to use the new story maps. Instead of having separate builder for different style stories, you just use different blocks and bring them out into your story and configure them to achieve basically the same thing. What's nice about that is with the classic story maps, if you didn't like the way the story worked, you know, if you used a map tour and really decided to use a cascade instead or vice versa, you had to rebuild your story. The great thing about these blocks is you can just change and insert different kinds of blocks and you don't have to rebuild your story from scratch. So that's an advantage of using the next gen story maps, the new story maps. And there's some really compelling new features that have been brought into those that make them something that you'll want to pay attention to. So I'm focusing on the new story maps, and those story maps are built using blocks. So when you open up a new story map, you can choose to insert a block. And if you hover over any of those, you'll get help. They're organized into different sections to help you figure out which ones to use. Once you choose a block, it opens up. And then depending on the block you've chosen, you'll have a different kind of configuration option. So some of those will be about the size, some of those will be about how it behaves, some of those will be about the layout of that particular block, but each has its own little configuration panel that you can hover over the top of the block and you can access the different configuration options doing it that way. Now, overall, your story map has a design tab that you can use to change the design. So these include things like adding a navigation bar on top using the headings in your story, or changing the theme of your story map. So we've got a few built-in themes, as you can see there. And when you click these, it fundamentally changes your story maps. You're going to see different colors in the background, of course, but you'll also see different fonts. You'll see different colors in the separators. And if you've used Express Maps, you'll see that the base maps will actually change. So for example, if I chose Obsidian as my theme, and I have Express Maps, the Express Maps will automatically change to a darker base map to sort of harmonize with the general theme and look and feel of the story map. And we'll show this during the demonstration here shortly. So choose a block, configure it, add blocks, and then you can overall design your story to get the effect that you want. And when you're finished, you go ahead and share and publish it. So easy steps to reach success. Now, these links are available in that PDF file, but they're just a general destination. So the StoryMaps website, where you're going to want to sign in with your ArcGIS account. StoryMaps do work with public free accounts. There's some functionality that isn't available if you're using StoryMaps in those public free accounts, but they'll appear as grayed out. So it'll be pretty obvious which ones are available to you if you're using a public account or not. You can also get a trial or a developer account, or if you work or are part of a university or another establishment that already uses ArcGIS Online, then you'll have full access to all of these capabilities. These links are just meant to help guide you quickly to some destinations where you can go to find resources. So when you think about your story, well, what do you need? What do you need to get started? Well, the first thing you need is an idea or some inspiration and some thought. You want to think about what kind of story is it that you want to tell? And then after that, you need to think about what are the components that you need to bring together to tell that story. And that could be lots of different types of media. That could be images or graphs or charts. It's also going to include a narrative, the story itself, the text or the description, the story that you want to tell that you're going to want to add to your story. And then finally, you can add maps. Now, we always think of these as kind of map-centric, coming from a Esri GIS perspective, but there's plenty of great stories, awesome stories, that actually don't use live maps. They might use static maps or screen captures. Some use live maps, some don't use any maps at all. It's really up to you, but I think we're encouraging you as part of this competition. One of the requirements is that you do leverage some of the Skag content and build your maps from those and incorporate that into your stories, or use an express map that has destinations in that express map that pertain to your story. But these are the key elements. But an interesting thing that we've discovered is that oftentimes the very best GIS people are really not so great at telling stories. It's kind of like a left brain, right brain kind of thing. And there's great storytellers that couldn't build a great map to save their life, but there's great mappers that have difficulty telling a story. So in general, the steps for success are: think about the story before you dive in. You might even want to try to sketch it out or outline it on paper before you go ahead and begin building the story. Then you're going to want to think about the different components that you need to bring together, those maps and images and videos and things like that you're going to want to pull into your story. Then go ahead and start building it and experiment. You refine your story, you simplify it, and you keep on repeating until you have something that you like. Now, one thing I find is that people that are really close to a story tend to be a little too verbose. And one thing to keep in mind is that this is going out to an other audience. So you're going to want to appeal to a more public audience. So your challenge is going to be to draw them into your story. And that could be just the opening graphics, a compelling video or a compelling photo. Also, you're going to want to keep your story kind of terse and compact, not too much information, but enough to keep it interesting and to keep the readers engaged with the story that you want them to read. And of course, once you've done all that refinement, then publishing and sharing is the final part. You can go back at any time and modify the story, change the layout, change the design, add more blocks, remove blocks, etc. So these can be pretty dynamic. So where do you find your maps and layers that you might want to incorporate into your story? And one of the destinations is the Skag Open Data Portal. So you can go there and you can search and explore the different data categories to find the maps that you want. Another way that you can find content is just simply in ArcGIS Online. All of the Skag content you can discover by using owner : Skag GIS admin. So that's the owner of all the Skag content. And when you search in ArcGIS Online, if you use that owner : Skag GIS admin, you'll find the Skag content. And if you're doing a general search, not from the map viewer itself, you also might want to filter based on the type. There are both web maps as well as layers that you will find that are owned by Skag GIS admin. So that's another way that you can find content to use in your story maps. And yet a third place that you can find additional content, which might be really good to provide some additional context, is the ArcGIS Living Atlas. And that's built into the map viewer experience. So you can browse additional Living Atlas layers directly from the map viewer. You can also go to the Living Atlas website and use the Browse tab to find additional content there. And this, depending on the story that you're building, could be just about anything. There's live feeds, live weather, there's lots of demographic information, there's transit information, there's live traffic, there's all sorts of interesting things that you might find would be a great addition to your story mapping efforts. One of the things you'll find about a lot of the Skag data is that it is it's fairly raw. I guess, and I say that in a kind way. Some of the content has a large number of features which make it a bit unwieldy when you just want to focus in on a portion of geography and tell a story about a particular location. So one of the things that I'll step you through real quickly is some basic map craft, how to reduce the number of features using filters. Another method would be using views. So there's various things that we can do to that content to kind of reduce the size and make it more performant within our story. Another technique is you can use scale dependencies. So only turn the layers on when folks are zoomed in, so that reduces the overhead. Other things that you're going to want to consider doing is you might want to change the style to highlight or visualize particular attributes. As you explore the Skag content, you'll see that there's lots of information, lots of attributes within them, and you might want to decide to style them on specific ones to pull out and highlight what you want. Another thing that you're going to want to do, and this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, so I'm always focused on it, but it's configure pop-ups. So rather than just display a raw kind of GIS dump of attributes, what you can do is you can create more compelling pop-ups so that your public audience can gain additional understanding and information about what it is that your map is showing. All right. And another, here's a little tip here. When you find the maps that you want, a way to make them readily available during your story map building experience is to favorite the map. So there's a little section that you can go to when you're browsing for maps to add to your story to make it easy to find. And that's your favorites, and just go ahead and click and add to favorites, and the little star will light up and it will be listed there amongst your favorites. The other thing you're going to want to look for is media. And one thing that as good story mappers we should practice is making sure that we're not infringing on copyrights for any photos or videos or things like that that we use. So if it's public domain, you can provide attribution to the source. There's lots of other areas or places that you can go that provide public domain images. So I use Pixabay quite a bit. Unsplash is also a good location. You can also go to YouTube and Vimeo. You can look at the Skag website. Again, as good story mappers, we want to make sure that we're not infringing on copyright for any of the content that we're using. So make sure it's public domain or coming from the Skag website or other places where it's okay to use things from. So once again, additional resources can be found in that storytelling group. And you can also search using this string here, tags, : Skag 2021, and that will show all of the items that I've tagged for this year's workshop and competition. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few things here now. So this is the story map group, and I've added some interesting things in here. Some of these are just some little tutorials, some little shortcuts to find some things. I've added some competition winners in the past. This is examples for you to look at. You'll know a good story map when you see one and when you experience one, and you'll see pretty quickly as you begin using them that there are things that you like and things that you don't like. So a way to learn how to build a good story map is actually experience what others have done and copy the things you like and neglect the things that you don't when you're building your own. So anyway, this is a collection of resources that you're welcome to browse and use, and this will be up all the time. Let's start by going ahead and looking at the open data portal from Skag. And I believe that Lyle has added this as a link to your resources. Actually, I know it's on the flyer that was part of the competition. That flyer is actually in the group that I authored as well. So you'll find it there. So you can find this open data location, and you can begin by exploring the categories here. So these are just ways to sort of refine your search. And you'll find items that match by clicking on those categories. You can also, if you want, you can just type in a keyword. So if I'm looking for general plan land use, I can go ahead and click that or search for that, and then I can find that item directly. So here's an example of one of those. Now, the way that in the open data portal that the content is presented is different than if you find the item in ArcGIS online. So the layout will be a little bit different. It's kind of maybe a little more geeky, I guess, might be one way to put it. You'll have a list of all the attributes up on top here. You'll have a little footprint of what's shown on the map. If you zoom way in, you'll start seeing features. You can kind of get a look at the data to see what's in it by clicking the data tab. Once again, from the overview tab, you can do things like create a web map directly from here. Now you'll notice here's a way to create a story map, but this opens up the Story Map Classic series template, which I'm not recommending is a good one to choose. You're going to want to go with the new stories, which are available on the new StoryMaps website. But let's go ahead and take a look at one of these maps, and I'll show you some of the things that you might want to consider. All right, so here's a map, and let's see how it opens up. And I think there's quite a bit of content here, so let's just wait for that to show up in our map. And for some reason, it looks like I've managed to find one of the ones that actually doesn't seem to be working at this moment. We'll go back and take another look at that. Let's go back and step back and let's choose something else. So let's look for some additional general plan land use. Let's try San Bernardino data, and let's open that up in our web map. And interestingly enough, it seems once again I've chosen something that doesn't quite work, but I did create a map. Oh, there it is. It just took a while. So this is actually going to be one of your challenges. There is a ton of data in some of these layers, and that's why it didn't show up at first, because there's just so much information that's there. So one of the first things that you might want to do, let's just go ahead and cancel this, is figure out how to get this into a more presentable way. So one thing you can do is you can zoom in. You can see once you zoom in, it's quite performant. When we're zoomed way out, it's not so performant. So one of the things that you can do is you can set a visibility range. So we can maybe set our visibility range here. So that way, as we zoom out, we're not pulling in all those features. The layer just becomes invisible at this point. And then when we zoom in, then those features begin to draw now because we've set the scale threshold. So that's a real easy way to kind of increase the performance of some of the layers in your maps. Another way is you can actually apply different filters. So I could look for things like a city or a county or one of the other attributes here to create a filter on. So let's get an idea of what's on the map first. So if I click one of these parcels, I'll see here's the city. The field is called city_T and it's Yucaipa. So if I wanted to make a map that dealt specifically with Yucaipa, what I could do is create a filter for that. So let's see, that was city_T is, and I can click unique to get a scrolling list of all the unique values. So in this case, let's choose Yucaipa, or I can just go ahead and enter in a value. So now what I've done is I've created a filter, which is only going to show me those that are for Yucaipa. So that's another way to reduce the size of the content that you're working with. Another thing that you'll notice is that the pop-ups are unconfigured. And there's things in here that make sense. There's things in here that don't make sense. So one of the things that you might want to do is make these pop-ups a little bit better. The way that you do that is you configure the pop-up. One of the first things you might want to do is, let's see, here's something called county_T. And I don't know what the _T is, but I can kind of fix that and make that a little bit more approachable for the user. So the first thing I can do is I can decide which ones that I want to display. So let's choose this one, and I can create a field alias. And I might want to avoid using all caps. So rather than yelling at someone, I'll use a little nicer phrase here. The other thing we can do is for numeric things, we can also control the number of decimal places. So let's just change this to no decimal places, and let's use the 1000 separator. So let's see what we have so far. I click OK to save my configuration, and now I've got a little bit better presentation. I forgot to change the density there to a mixed case one, but you get the idea. You can make these pop-ups a little bit better. The other thing you can do, which is really interesting, is when you configure the pop-ups, you can choose a custom attribute display. So let's do that. And what's nice about this is you can mix plain text. So I can say something like this parcel is located in, and then I can choose one of the fields. So let's use the city. And I can also do things like selected. I can make the size a little bit bigger. I can also do things like change the colors and change the font. Let's just take a look at what we've done here. So here I've chosen one of the attributes, and actually my text there isn't so well formatted. I should have made that this parcel is located in the city of Yucaipa instead of Yucaipa City, but you get the idea. This is a really cool way to kind of configure pop-ups. Let's take a look at some examples. So here's one that I focused on for Pomona. And what I did in this case was I added a filter, and if you open up the filter, you'll be able to see it. So here's where I said, just return the features where the city is Pomona. So that reduced the number of features in my map. And I've also configured the pop-up. So this pop-up here is using, bold and text as well as plain text. It's used that custom attribute display and even some color to just pull out certain bits of information. So this is a much better display than the default one, which is just a list of all the attributes which aren't particularly meaningful to a more public audience. They are to other expert audiences, but in this case, you're building a story for grander use, so you're going to want to refine some of those pop-ups. You can also do the same with all of the other things that you'll find from Skag. For example, here's bike routes in their kind of raw format. And once again, to zero in on the city of Pomona, what I did was I added a filter to filter for those in Pomona, and I've also configured the pop-up so it's just a little bit nicer. So let me save my work here. Let's put on the land use, and let's put on the bike routes, and let's go ahead and save that. And now I'm going to go back to my content and I'm going to favorite this because I want to pick this up and use this in my story. So here's Skag content examples. I can select that and I can favorite here, or I can open up the item details, the item pages for this, and I can add to favorites there. So by doing so, I just make this easily discoverable when I'm creating my stories. So let's go ahead and create a story. So if you go to storymaps.arcgis.com, that's where you can sign in using your account. So I'll go ahead and do that. And now that I've signed in, I'm taken directly to the places where my stories are. Here's one that I built earlier. This one is also in that group, and it's basically just an introduction to Skag and kind of story maps. Now, if you've created a story, you can go ahead and edit the story by clicking the edit button. If you're the owner, you have editing capabilities. And you'll see your story in edit mode. And what edit mode allows you to do is change things that are part of your story. For example, if I wanted to come up here and change the picture, actually, this is good that I open this up. If you're crafting this for mobile devices, you can change the focus on images and so forth. And you can also do things like replace images. So if I wanted to change this one and use a different background, I can go ahead and choose that and replace the background in my story map. As you go through your story, you'll see these little plus signs. Those plus signs are how you add blocks, and the blocks are shown here. If you hover over these, you'll get a little help, which is very handy. Some of these are very simple and they're very easy to understand. Image blocks are simple. Map blocks are simple too. Some of these are a little bit more involved. So here's some of the immersive blocks. So I can do things like add a sidecar, and a sidecar has a couple of different configurations. So I can float the panel, or I can dock the panel. Once I add an immersive block, then I am prompted to add additional things like add an image or a video here. Let's go ahead and add an image here in this case. And we'll choose one of those and we'll add that. And then this layout also allows me to add other things. So I can begin by adding some text. I'm going to copy and paste a little bit of text and place that in there. And you can see we have a nice scroll by text thing. I can also take this and I can duplicate it if I like my layout. And then once I duplicate that, I can move on to this and I can change the image with a different image if I like, or add a video or other things as I move along. So they're pretty self-explanatory, and really the best way to sort of figure out how these work is just to begin experimenting with them and having fun. Now, at the top here, you can see in this story, I've got a navigation pane. Let me show you how to set that up. That's set up in design. So I click the design tab, and this is where I can choose a different layout for my cover. So I can have my graphic on one side, the text on the left. I can bring my graphic to the top, or I can make it an immersive graphic. So you can make some decisions about that. By default, the navigation pane is off, but you can turn that on here. And what that does is anywhere that you have a type of text that is a heading, this is how you choose the text type, anywhere that there is heading text, that appears on top here. Now, that is configurable. You can choose which ones you want to display and which ones that you don't in the navigation bar, and you can also edit the text to suit. So you can make a really good navigation bar to help people move around your story. Another thing that's really interesting is, let me scroll down here. I've got some maps a little further down below, and let's work with some maps. Here I've created, I've used a side panel, floating side panel that scrolls between a couple of images and moves from left to right. You can look at this example. And here I've added a couple of different maps. Maps can be sized in different ways. So this is a map of Washington, D.C., and the pop-ups are as I configured them. I can pop these open into larger view if I've left this open, and can continue to explore the map and look at the pop-ups as I've configured them here in the application. And I can also reduce them. I can choose how I want these to display by default by governing the size, and I can add a new one just by going here to the map block. Now, these are all the maps in my ArcGIS account. And I mentioned adding favorites, so we can look at what we've recently favorited. And here's the one that we just worked on a little bit, so I can find it really easily because I favorited it. And now we can add it. And this, of course, is my map showing Pomona and the bike paths as I saved it. And the pop-ups are configured just exactly as I saved those as well in my map. So we've now added a map. If I wanted to go ahead and edit this, I can click this button here, Edit Map in ArcGIS, and I can also do things like override some of the defaults. So I can change the visibility of different layers and so forth as I move through. If I want to use this map, I can go ahead and place the map, and now it becomes part of my story. So you can see I've added that. Express maps are also very interesting, and they're fun to make as well. So here's a little express map that I made that shows the Skag regional offices. And express maps are added in a similar way. I just choose to use a map block. But this time, instead of choosing one of the maps that I've already authored it, that I may have favorited it, that I may have found in ArcGIS Online, or by using Skag GIS Admin as an owner search, I can click this button at the top, and I can view a little mini tutorial about how to create a express map. And then I can begin adding things. So for example, let's go to 380 New York Street. So I can type in an address and zoom to that location, and I can place a marker and add it to the map. Once the marker's been added to the map, I can refine what shows. So for example, I can choose a little image to display in the pop-up, and I can add a little description here. So this is home of storytelling at Esri. So once we're done, I've got a little pop-up that opens up and displays the little graphic that we have there. Once I'm happy with the express map that I've created, I can go ahead and add it to my map, and I can continue to format it further by choosing a different size or continuing to add features and other types of markup and so forth. So that is the quick overview tutorial of kind of how to get started. So it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. It's a lot of fun. Just go in and experiment, and it's kind of really interesting to just see what you can do and experiment. Let me go back to my stories and show you one more thing. So these are the stories that I have created so far. Another interesting thing you can do is you can create what are called story collections. So story collections house either a collection of other story maps, or you can add other maps and apps to story collections. And these are pretty interesting because you can collect up story maps about a particular theme. So here I've created something called the Pristine Seas collection, and I've added a bunch of story maps to this. To add things to these, you either create a new collection or edit a collection and look for the Add to Collection button, and then you can browse and choose to add other stories or other maps and apps to a collection, and this can be shared as well. So with that, I think I'll stop here. If anybody has any questions, or if Lyle has any commentary, I think now's a good time.
Great, thank you, Bern. We did have one question earlier in the chat from Siri Champion. They asked, can a map search be incorporated into a story map? And so what I'm assuming is they mean, if you have a map displayed, can you have a little search bar included in it? So if they're looking for a specific location.
Okay, you can create what is called a map action, which can turn off or on specific layers in an existing map or zoom to a particular location. If that's what you meant, then yes, that is possible. And there's some information in some of the tutorials about how to do that. And I'll go ahead and add that to the chat or add that to the resources. If you're searching for a map, that's probably not the way to go in a story. A story should be a finished presentation that you're going to want others to read, rather than have them search for maps within the story. So I'm not quite exactly sure what you may have intended to ask about there, but if you can provide some clarification, maybe I can go further.
Yeah, I don't think Siri's still on here. But I think, for example, a good one would be like if you're in the Pomona map, and you have that displayed, and somebody lives in Pomona, and I guess they might want to be like, oh, I wonder like if I can look up my address in this map. Is that a possibility, do you think?
Yes, it is a possibility. And the way that you would do that would be, the way that I would do that is I would either add the web map through an embed, or I would put the web map in another application that's map focused, something like Minimalist or something like that, and then I would embed that in the story. So let's see if I can do that like super duper quick. So here's my map, and let's go ahead and save my changes here. And I'll do this really quickly and roughly. And once I've done that, I can go ahead and share the map. I'm going to want to make sure it's public if I'm putting it in a public story map. And then I might want to create a web app. And in this case, since we want to stay focused on the map, I'm going to choose Minimalist. Now, you can go ahead and click create the web app, and that gives you all sorts of different configuration options. So you can turn off or on the search. You can add some additional buttons and tools. I'm going to try to shortcut this a little bit, and we'll take a look at it in preview mode. So there it is. You can see we have a little search tool here that's in there by default. So if I wanted to add that to my story map, let me go back and edit a story. Wait for things to catch up here. And let's go ahead and add that using an embed. So using an embed, you just go ahead and add a link to that map, or you can go ahead and use the embed code from the map. So here I've just added a little card. And because I didn't finalize that and add a graphic and so forth, I just have a little card that can be clicked and opened. But I could use the HTML embed code that can also be generated through the map, and that provides the viewer a way to do the search and be able to find a specific location. So I hope I answered that okay.
Yeah, I think that was very helpful. We have another question. Can you embed an interactive Esri crowdsourcing poll or a citizen problem reporter map app into a story map?
Yes, you can. And that's a very interesting thing to do, and it's really effective. You could actually, depending on how you're doing the polling, you can even do things like embed a survey 1, 2, 3 form in the story map as well. And that's a really good way to kind of get some collaborative action going within a story map. So yes, you can embed other apps, or you can actually embed a survey 1, 2, 3 form if you're collecting some additional information about a particular location or just want to gauge user impressions and so forth.
Great. Another question we have is, can you develop a story map in multiple languages to provide the map text with translation?
That is something I am going to have to double check for you on. There are some caveats with the locale of your browser and so forth. So let me take that as a homework assignment for me, and I'll get back to you with information about how to make a multilingual story map.
Great, thank you. We have another question, which is actually something I am interested in, is how printable are story maps? Is there any template or format that allows the story map builder the ability to print a story map if they need to?
Well, we would hope that the story could be used interactively, because obviously there's a lot of action that you can configure into a story and moving parts and so forth. We do have a way that you can capture the story map statically as a document. It's not ideal, but if you really needed to, you could. Offhand, I can't remember if we've actually implemented that in the production story map yet or not, or whether it's still something that we're looking at in beta and will soon be released. So that'll be another homework assignment for me to get back to you on.
Okay, yeah, I know that in some of Skag's instances, we've applied for a few awards for projects, and it's one of those things where they don't allow you to just submit a link to a story map. So we'd like to do that at some point. But
Sure, sounds good. So Lyle, what's the best way to get back with answers? Should I just send you the answers and then you can distribute to the
yeah,
participants?
what I can do is include some of these Q&As as a piece of our email that we'll send out with copies of the presentation, the links to all the story maps, and then I'll just have a list of Q&As and yeah, I'll have you get back to me, and then we'll include those in there.
Okay, it sounds good. I'll go back and I'll catch up with the other questions in the chat, and I'll add those to an email or a document that I'll send you, Lyle, and then you can distribute that.
Great. It looks like Dominique said that the 3 buttons at the top have a print option next to publish.
So let's try that. There we go. Okay, so it is here. I often get I lose track about what we've put in the production versions and what we haven't. So here is the story map that I just created, and you can see it's not exactly ideal because here I had some flyby text which isn't being captured.
I think it is below. It's
below
yeah.
down here, right?
Yeah.
So it's not ideal because you don't have that dynamic sort of ability, but it does seem to have done a reasonable job of capturing what's in the story. Of course, your maps aren't interactive and things like that, so you do miss a lot of that interactivity, but it does look like, thank you for pointing that out, that you can get a good printable experience from a story map. So that's one question I won't have to answer.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Dominique, and thank you, Vern. Any other questions from folks in the chat? And I responded to somebody's question earlier. They had asked if we were going to send out copies of hyperlinks to the story maps that were presented today, and the answer is yes. So be on the lookout for the email from us when we send out the follow-up thank you that has the presentation itself, and then as well as it'll have links to all of the story maps that were covered today. Great. I'm going to just share my screen real quick, Bern, if you don't mind.
All right.
And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that attended today. This slide has all of the contact information for all of our presenters. And so take a look at that. And if you have any specific questions regarding any of the story maps that you saw today, feel free to take a look at it, and you can reach out directly to those folks if you'd like. But with that, if there aren't any, I'll stick around for a few more minutes for any follow-up questions, but that's about it. So thank you all for attending today. And once again, the Student Showcase abstracts are due on March 8th, which is a week, about 2 weeks away. And if you have any questions regarding the Student Showcase, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be leading that competition. So,
I'd like to say thanks again, Lyle and Skag, for having me. And you can send questions directly to me. I promise to compile them, and I'll send them to Lyle for distribution. So you can keep the questions coming, and yeah, we can just do it that way, and I'll get them all to Lyle then as a follow-up. But thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. All right. I'll just stick around just a minute to see if there's any additional questions that come through, but feel free to hop off if you don't have any to ask. All right, seeing no more questions coming through, I'm gonna allow Jennifer to end the meeting. But if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Bern, and we'll get back to you pretty quickly. Thank you.
Thanks, Lyle.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Hey, Lyle, I'm going to capture some of the questions and links from the chat, or do you, I guess I could just download the chat file, I suppose.
Yeah, I think I can get a copy of the chat from Jennifer.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that'll be perfect. And you forward that to me, I'll call out the questions. Someone has already asked for a little follow-up meeting, so I've already sent them an email, and I'll pick the questions off and say the links and things like that.
Great, sounds good, Bern.